Oh, thank you for this invitation for the conference. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, but I'll do the next best thing in talking to you today about personalised learning. What I want to do is talk about personalised learning in a connected world, and I think this is actually one of the most important topics that we need to actually focus on. I'm the Pro Vice-Chancellor Learning Transformations at Swinburne University. I come at things from a design perspective, and you'll see that throughout the presentation. And I'll talk to you about why I think personalised learning is important, but particularly in the context of learning spaces. So what we're going to look at today, I want to look at how we define learning spaces, because really what we're trying to do, it's too narrow a definition at the moment. A lot of people talk about physical spaces, physical learning spaces, and I'll talk about expanding that definition as we go through. I'll then talk about defining personalised learning and then move on to Personalised Learning Toolkit, and I'll break this down in terms of some of the aspects. The photographs throughout here are photographs that I've taken myself, and you'll see the first one here, a group of people looking at with binoculars going bird watching. What are we actually looking at? And again, the photos, if you're interested, are about personalised learning, and you'll see some portraits that I've taken throughout as we go through. First thing I'd like to start with is the big picture. Why is personalised learning important? And I usually start with the technology outlook and the challenges. As you can see there in the middle column, personalised learning is one of the major challenges that we're facing in the Australian tertiary education sector. If you look on the left-hand side of that screen, that's the global context where you've got other aspects. And on the right-hand side, you can see the 2014 context as we're going through. So it is really one of the challenges that we're facing. Another one that we focus on at Swinburne in the work that we do, rethinking the role of educators, which has personalised learning as part of that, and looking at creating authentic learning opportunities. And I think these are some of the challenges we face in Australia, and I'm sure this is the same across the globe, about what we're trying to do to make education much better for our students and for our teachers. In terms of moving on then about defining learning spaces, this is the way I look at it. It's a very balanced and broad approach. I look at physical, blended or virtual environments that enhance learning. And so any of these particular areas, if they enhance learning, they are classed as a learning space from my point of view. I also look at physical, blended or virtual areas that motivate a learner to learn. So again, very broad, but if we can motivate learners in these different spaces, then that's a learning space from my point of view. And that could be, we could be on the train going to work in some countries, we could be at home, we could be in the formal teaching classroom. Again, these physical, blended or virtual learning spaces are really important. In addition, I think this is the key aspect about spaces. The fact is that we need to have a language to talk about spaces. I talk about the affordances of spaces. So what are the action possibilities of those spaces that we can actually look at? So where both teachers and students optimize those perceived and actual affordances of the space is really important. So we can have a lecture room where we perceive that we can actually teach in several different ways, but may be limited by the constraints of the physical barriers of chairs not being able to turn around to do group work. We may have open classrooms where you can actually move around desks and chairs. So the idea is that these are the physical affordances or the actual affordances, but the good teacher needs to be able to be aware of adding the pedagogy to actually teach in certain ways, whether it's peer learning, whether we're doing problem-based learning, whether we're doing project-based learning, using scenarios, getting students to actually project their computer up onto the screen so other students can see what they're doing. I also talk about spaces that promote authentic learning interactions. This is a key concept at Swinburne University and a lot of universities, but we're moving into making learning authentic. That is, the transfer from the actual theory to practice is no longer the case. We're focusing on that authentic nature of learning and teaching and getting students ready when they graduate. My view of the world is that students need to be able to solve the problems of the world that we can't solve now. And that's my entire focus at Swinburne University, working with the teachers. If we can actually empower them to teach students to solve problems, we're doing a great job in terms of that. And that's really at the core. And if you're going to ask me one key concept of what I do in my work, that would be the one, to empower the teachers to do that. If we now move on, and we've spoken about this broad definition of learning spaces, and I know at the conference you're going to have a number of delegates, a number of speakers presenting on physical learning spaces and on online learning spaces or virtual learning spaces, and then the blended nature of those two. And so that, if you like, that broad way I'm looking at spaces is across all of these. So a physical space, we all know that, we're sitting in one now. A virtual space could be a blog that we're interacting in or a learning management system. And we can look at the idea of blended spaces, which is the best of all worlds. When we talk about personalised learning, I have a very clear definition of this, and I have a paper which I'll send with my presentation that delegates are welcome to utilise. And this is a chapter in a book recently. But I define personalised learning as the knowledge, skills and attitudes that enable learning and act as a catalyst to empower the learner to continue to learn. Now, very simple definition, but I'll break down knowledge, skills and attitudes in a moment, but also to the fact that we're trying to encourage students to continue to learn. In some ways, it's not that important what they know now. It's more important that they have the ability and the knowledge, skills and attitudes to continue to learn, because the world is changing. We're not sure what is going to be, how the world will look in 20, 30 years in terms of the learning context. And so a personalised learner needs to be able to cope with the ambiguity that we have in this environment. Hence, it's about continuing to learn. And that's one of the greatest gifts we can give our students and our teachers as well. So when we talk about these knowledge, skills and attitudes, I think of now knowledge is now co-created. We look at skills forming a basis for learning, and that attitudes influence beliefs and behaviours, and that we think of then learning from a growth mindset point of view, and that we openly seek challenge. For those who don't know me, I've worked at 8 different universities. I've generally moved around a number of times because I like the challenge of different contexts in doing my work, in always from a learning and teaching point of view with staff development, professional development. And so that's openly seeking challenge, if you like. Not everyone wants to do that, but for some reason I like to do that. And it's one of the things that I have done in my previous roles and things as I go through. If we look at this personalised learning toolkit now, and this is an interesting one, these are the skills, knowledge, skills and attitudes we need to have in all of these areas, and I'll break each of these down. Digital literacies is being thrown around, very difficult to define, very difficult to know what it is because it keeps changing even as we speak. Seamless learning I'll talk about because we need if you like, less seams in the process of learning as we go through. Self-regulated learning is something that we all need to do. So we take a lot of ownership for our own learning, and there are certain stages we can go through. We need to think of assessment differently as well. Too much pressure is put on our students with assessment, and we need to put the learning back into assessment, and I'll talk more about that. Lifelong, life-wide learning I'll distinguish, and then talk about these flexible learning pathways. And I think this has a lot of potential. And again, this is some different ideas and hopefully thought-provoking about what we're talking about in personalised learning. Okay, let's have a look at the toolkit then. The first one in the levels of digital literacies, I talk about competency, fluency and design. And I'll explain this one and then we'll move through. The first thing we need is in this day and age, we need digital literacies. We need to have an ability to use digital technology, whatever form that is. And this will change over time. But we need a certain level of competency to actually allow us to actually interact with our computers, to communicate across the globe, even to actually work with our mobile phone to see how we use it. Digital fluency, like in languages, when we're fluent in a language, we want to be able to apply these digital knowledge and skills to the work we're doing in our learning. And again, that's a fluency. To me, as a designer, and I can't help but view the world from a design perspective, I think if we get it to the point of view where we can generate content, so user-generated content, or we're a learner as designer, so project-based learning, problem-based learning, students developing content through digital medium, whether that's video, photographs, portfolios, whatever it is, that's the highest form of digital literacy, because we need competency, we need fluency, and there's creativeness going in there as well. And that's why that's the higher level, if you like, as we go through. Give you a bit of an idea of the context of this. Steve Wheeler, who some of the delegates may know, has done some great work, and this is his particular schema for digital literacies. Transliteracy skills is probably one of those big areas that we can work across all the different areas of technology, digital citizenship, information literacy, etc. What's going to become more important in the future, as Steve points out here, is maintaining privacy and managing identity in the future. But we want to look at reusing, repurposing content, and that's where open educational resources come into play in open education. Things like self-broadcasting, and there is a link on the slide there which I'll send through to the delegates. If you want to know more, you can go to Steve Wheeler's blog, who talks about this in a very eloquent way in terms of digital literacies. So these are some of these digital design spaces that I look at. Flickr is well known, at least in the Western world, YouTube, photographs, video, Facebook, Twitter, 140 characters, Blogger, SlideShare, where I put my slides, LinkedIn, and other ones as well. So these are places I personally use to actually design. And I'll show you some examples of that through, say, photography sites, or through the Blogger, or through Scoopit and so forth as we're going through. One I'll pick out there is SlideShare, and it's an interesting one. SlideShare is where, for those who don't know about this software, it's where you place your slides when you're going to present, and you can share them with the world, and you can set different parameters on who sees them and who doesn't. This was done on my part because I was trying to back up my slides, make sure I had another place to actually do some of the things that we're examining. So for the presentation today, I'll also have some slides for people to download on my SlideShare site. But the interesting thing about this is that by sharing your knowledge, you're actually doing good for the world, is what I say. And I've had lots of visitors to this, and it's very interesting. It's taken on a life of its own. At this point in time, it's over 200,000 views for my SlideShare collection because I do a lot of presentation. But what's more important to me, I've had about 3,000 or 4,000 downloads of presentations. So these are people who have stopped and looked, but they've downloaded, and they actually are going to use them. And to me, that's part of my job as an academic, to share knowledge in this particular way. And I think it's a good focus to actually examine that. So again, this sort of digital design, if you like, or digital space where we can actually self-broadcast, comes into these digital literacy skills. And I do suggest to anyone in the audience, the best way to learn about these types of things is to play with them, and to play with technology every day, because this is what digital literacy is about. It's always changing. I'm an avid photographer. I love portraits. I love traveling to different countries. I've been to Oman, I've been to India, Sri Lanka, and also to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. So you'll see in my photos, people are what I gravitate to, and these are some of the ones that I've actually taken. Now this again is a digital design space for me, and it's my photography gallery, if you like, of people I've met and I'm trying to tell a story. Now again, this is something I'm interested in as a hobby, but again, it's pushing my digital design skills. And again, here's some examples of trying to tell a story through a portrait. And different ones there. And if you're interested, you could do a search for that particular website if you're interested. So that's about digital literacies, which I think is one of the core skills everyone's going to need in the future. And we're going to have to really put a lot of effort into that and build it into our curriculums as we go through. And this is essential, whatever space we're in. If we move now to seamless learning, and this is the idea that there's a continuity of learning across a combination of locations, times, technologies, or social settings. Sharples in 2012, 2013, and later work has looked at this idea. But great concept in that we have these, we get rid of the seams as we go through for our learning. And so we go from primary school, at least what it's called in Australia, to secondary school, to, if you like, to professional education, to university education. And we want to actually make the seams as easy as possible. Latest work from Sharples and colleagues has looked at the idea we need to celebrate the seams as well. So that we actually need to stop and think about those transitions. And I think that's some particularly interesting idea. There's a 2012 report there, but you'll find 2013, 2014, and even 2015, where there's some great work coming out of the Open University of the UK in terms of this area. If we look at levels of seamless learning then, we've got the on-campus experience, which most of us are familiar with. We need to be in this environment comfortable with the formal learning spaces and the informal learning spaces. Formal learning spaces are the teaching classrooms. Informal spaces are the ones we may go to, the cafeteria, when we want to do some work with our friends. The next level for this is that we need to start to get students comfortable in the virtual campus with the blended, the online, the social media. The next one is anywhere, and this is using mobile technology. If students are travelling or they're in different parts of the university, in cafes, they're teleworking, they need to have the digital literacy skills, but need to have this ability to learn wherever they are. One of the best lines I like to use is, nobody ever asks where we send an email from. All people want to know is, did we deal with the issue in the email? So there is a sense of in this that space is irrelevant where we are. And I think that's sort of some of the philosophy I have about learning spaces as we go through. These are some of the distributed learning spaces, and some of the work I do is in, this came out of an edited book that we put together a few years ago, the physical, blended and virtual spaces. Some of the ones there, we're obviously looking at personalised learning today, but you can have outdoor, you can have professional practice, and a wide range of spaces there. And I think it's worthwhile to think of space in its broadest term rather than be too narrow, because I think sometimes we're too fixated on physical learning spaces. These are some virtual learning spaces that we all know about, learning management systems like Blackboard and Moodle, Sakai. The ones I've spoken about already, the social media ones, the Flickr, the YouTubes, the Twitter, etc. And these are virtual learning spaces where both the students can learn in a productive way, as long as we use the affordance of that space for its best use. It's a very exciting time to be in education, because we have a richer range of spaces that we can actually use for learning and teaching. And these are getting larger as we speak. We're going to look at the next one here in terms of levels of self-regulated learning. If we want personalised learning, we're going to have to put the onus back onto the learner. But we have to teach them how to learn first of all. So the first stage for this, we need to scaffold learning for the learners. And so the teachers need to provide a scaffolding using Vygotsky's scaffolding concept, and looking at Anne Ausubel, intellectual scaffolding, looking at the idea that we're trying to actually examine this idea of creating a context where we can actually help the learner to learn. The next level is strategic learners. So learners beginning to manage their own learning. And again, we need to provide opportunities in our curriculum in these physical, blended and virtual spaces to do that. And we need to be explicit about this. The aim, obviously, is to create autonomous learners. Learners being able to judge when they need to learn other material to actually empower them for their work or to actually complete tasks. We've got a rich range of resources on the internet, but we need to be able to filter and use those resources in the best way possible. So in this one, learners become strategic learners as we're going through. Next one here, and this is one of the areas I think we can have the biggest gain in higher education or in tertiary education. It's about trying to change the attitude to assessment. There is too much assessment of learning at the moment. We need to move to authentic assessment. And in authentic assessment, it looks at real-world problems that we're trying to solve. Hence what I was saying before, if we can actually have students who graduate who have the skills and knowledge and attitudes to be able to try to grapple with some of the problems that we can't solve in the world at the moment. And they would be things like possibly global warming in terms of that side of things. So with authentic assessment, again, we've got a scaffold. So learners participate in authentic assessment. They then look at the next level down where they actually work with the teacher and they negotiate their assessment. So there's some freedom to actually look at what they will do in their assessment within the bounds of the curriculum and the accreditation. The aim for personalised learners is to get to self-assessment, where we can actually judge what we know and don't know and act on this feedback as feed forward, as I call it. So it's irrelevant what feedback we give to the students if we don't act on it. If we give good feedback to students and they think that I've got to do something with it, which is this idea of feed forward, then we've got the self-assessment cycle going. So students need to have this as a way of working, self-assessing themselves and moving forward as we go through this. In terms of learning-oriented assessment, and this was a project that, a large project that I completed in Hong Kong, we looked at the idea of assessment tasks as learning tasks, student involvement in the assessment processes, and forward-looking feedback. And if you're interested in this topic, David Carlis from Hong Kong University is probably one of the best people to look at, and he's just recently put out a book on this area. But a great form of assessment because it starts to get the learning back into the assessment because it's doing double duty. It's now assessing the student, but they're learning. And these are rich assessment tasks, using portfolios, using real-life problems, projects, etc. as we go through. A little bit more about assessment tasks as learning tasks. They determine the student effort. As we know, the default curriculum for students in anything that they're learning is, how long will this take and how am I going to be assessed? But the big thing about assessment, we need to get away from these one-off assessment tasks like exams. We need to get the balance back so that we distribute the student time and effort across the curriculum as we're going through. We need student involvement in the assessment. When I was working in Hong Kong, one of the units or the subjects I was teaching, I created the rubric, as a lot of people do, for a project. But in the first class, I had students interact with me to actually give input into that rubric. It was half completed, and I took on board a lot of their ideas. I was trying to get buy-in from the students, but I was also trying to get them to negotiate and get them to be involved in the assessment tasks. But they also learn about assessment and they determine the quality of their own work is very important by doing that. In terms of the last one, and I think this is a key concept from this presentation, and this one I think is essential, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this. This idea is feedback as feed forward. we need timely feedback, we need to have the potential to act on it. And there are lots of people out there, Gibson Simpson and David Carlos, and some of my own writing, I've looked at this as well. Why is it in the fitness industry they're doing this very well? And for those who don't know this diagram, Fitbits are the bracelets you wear and track your steps. And then you upload it to this environment where it can track all the different steps that you've done, the distance, all these sorts of things that you can do. Now, this is a while ago that I looked at this, but they're claiming that the users take 43% more steps with Fitbit. And I wear one constantly myself at the moment, a particular mechanism for tracking steps. Now, if I act on that in feedback as feed forward, I will keep fitter. If I ignore it, then nothing will change. But again, I think it's a nice mechanism that we can have as a, if you like, a metaphor for some of the things that we can actually examine in tertiary education, that we need to be able to give better feedback to our students so they can act on it. Here are some other areas. I'm an avid, I have a phys ed background, physical education background, so I'm very interested in keeping fit. This is another device called the Garmin device. This one you upload all your data and you can actually track it where you've been walking and running. But they've actually balanced it with badges. And I was surprised one time when I went in there, not driven by this, but was curious about the learning ecosystem, that at some stage in 2015, I hit 2 million steps. Now, I tried to work out how much time I'd spent doing that, and that was a little scary in some ways, but it did suggest that I was trying to keep active. And some people are driven by badges, some students, some teachers. But again, I thought it was really interesting that the fitness industry is doing a really good job of this. Why aren't we doing this in our school settings and in higher education? And hopefully people in the audience are doing some of these things. Here's another one. I mentioned before that I'm an avid photographer. The biggest change with digital photography, I don't think, has been the fact that we can actually use digital images and upload them. The fact is that when we take photographs, I get feedback on every photograph that I take. I can ignore it, or I can take it on board and improve the shot for that same subject. I tell the story about I used to do a lot of underwater photography when we had film in the cameras. And it takes you hours to set up the camera. You go on a scuba dive, you go down, you get your lighting, you take your 36 images when I was using film. You come back up to the boat, and then you realize you've left the lens cap on. So again, 3 hours of work was wasted because I was getting no feedback on whether I'd even taken a photograph, let alone about the quality of what I'd done, about the positioning of the strobes or the subjects, etc. Other ones there, I used to be a scuba diving instructor, so they use dive computers. Again, feedback is feed forward. And there's a good reason for that, because you have to actually limit the amount of nitrogen your body absorbs. So again, there's a real need for that. Again, you can ignore it, but with that one, it's not a good one to ignore if you're absorbing too much nitrogen or diving too deep. So again, this idea of feedback as feed forward, I think, is something that we need to embrace in tertiary education with our learning spaces. These sorts of devices, the TomTom, the Garmin, these are GPS systems used in a car. To me, learning in the future needs to be a little bit like these GPS systems. These days, I don't drive anywhere in Melbourne or around Australia without using one of these. They save me time, they direct me, they get me to the place using the fastest route, etc. But what if we make a mistake? This is the interesting thing about these. At no point in time does the TomTom change its tone of voice. At no point in time does the TomTom say, "You've made a mistake, Mike." All it does is say, take the next right instead of taking the previous right. So it finds another journey and adapts to my personalised learning journey in going from A to B. I think education in the future needs to be driven by some of these sorts of things. And I think technology has a place in these learning spaces for personalised learning. Next one there is lifelong and life-wide learning, and the idea that we need to encompass both the formal and informal learning and the self-motivated learning. And a lot of places around the world are recognising prior learning. But not just the lifelong learning. We need to have this continuum of always learning, but this idea that we want life-wide learning so that we have these parallel and interconnected journeys and experiences. So we have a breadth as well as a longevity in terms of our learning. And we need to encourage our learners that what they learn today may not be as relevant in 2, 3, 4 years' time. They need to keep learning and keep upgrading. And I think being continuous learners is going to be the key. Levels of lifelong learning. The short term, learners are focused on current courses or subjects, and we understand that from our students that they're focusing on what they're doing. But we need to get them thinking about relating what they're doing to their future job. We need to get them looking at the idea that being a learner is just part of being in the world today, in the connected world. So learning becomes a customary practice as we go through. For these sorts of things, you see all these photographs. I've been doing vocational photography courses for years. And again, I've never met the instructors. And all I want from those courses is to get good feedback from an expert photography instructor and to see what other students will do in terms of the assignments. E-portfolios is one of the clever tools we can use in higher education. These are populated by the learner, and we're able to present multiple stories of learning. And there's some of the ones we at least have around in Australia. PebblePad, Mahara, and also 2 other ones to Desire to Learn. But I'm sure there's other ones on the market in different places in the world. To me, and again, this is a quote from this paper that I was talking about, but this is really at the core of what I'm talking about. So the future will require learners to be lifelong learners whose ability to learn will be an essential survival kit set to thrive in this changing world. So we really need this survival skill set to do this. And this will allow us to thrive. It's so important to do this in terms of this lifelong learning. These are images. If you search the web for desire paths, you'll come across these sorts of things. In Australia, the right-hand track we call a goat track. Not sure where that term came from, but the idea being that you can see the paved path, which is the normal route, but people have wanted to take a shortcut. This is what our learners want. They want to get from A to B in the quickest time possible. So we need to give them the ability to do this. So this is where the rigidity of our curriculum needs to change. We need to allow students to actually do more courses or speed up what they're doing and take some shortcuts in doing that in terms of time, because this is the way it works with these desire paths. So when we're talking about learning pathways, too much in tertiary education is prescribed. We need to make it flexible so that the learner has some choice. And in open education, we can get the learner to construct their own learning pathway. And some groups like the Open Education Consortium, which I'm on the board of directors for, and the OERU, who do these sort of tailored courses, are nice approaches for the future as we go through. So what I've looked at there in terms of this is personalised learning and the personalised learner needing a toolkit. I've spoken about the importance of digital literacies. I've spoken about the fact that learning doesn't occur just in one place. I've spoken about the idea that we need to become more self-regulated learners and that assessment practices need to change. We need to put more learning into assessment. We need to encourage students to be lifelong and life-wide learners, and our teachers as well. And we need to create flexible learning pathways as we're going through. I'll finish with this, and if you're interested in what this presentation is based on, it was published last year, 2015, in MOOCs and open education around the world. George Siemens did a review of the book, and he mentioned specifically about the chapter I had in there, and he noted that that learning, constant learning, defines all aspects of life today, whether the target of learning is a college degree, promotion at work, or simply understanding the world. And for those who don't know George, he's done a lot of work in connectivism and one of the world experts in the area, which has a lot to do with this conference and a lot to do with this presentation about personalised learning in the connected world as we go forth. For those who are interested, I've got some references here that you can follow up. And I've got a couple of pages of those as we go through, so you can go to those and find those. And they're publicly available or through journals. As I was saying, I work for Swinburne, and we think about learning transformations. And hopefully in this presentation today, I've spoken about the importance of what we're doing and working with our learners. I think if we can create more personalised learners, I think we can make the world a better place, and I think we're going to be doing our job to allow those students to solve the problems that we can't solve today. So thank you very much. Apologies for not being able to attend the conference once again, but hopefully you've got a little bit of an insight into why I think personalised learning is going to be one of the most important areas we're going to focus on probably in the next 5 or 10 years in tertiary education. So thank you very much.